doing this? They're just taking Indiana Jones and they're raping him! I can't watch! Let's get out of here, Kyle!
Have you ever been in a situation where you can just sense that everyone in the room was collectively questioning the decision that they just made? Well, that's what I felt the other night when I sat in a theater that was barely a quarter full. Directly to my left was a man in his late 50s wearing a head-to-toe Indiana Jones costume, hat, whip, and all. In years past, this would have indicated to me that I wasn't just seeing a film. I was having an experience, and the thought alone would get me excited. However, on this day, the only thing I could feel was sadness. Sad that the world of entertainment has gotten to this point. Sad for the children growing up in a world devoid of films with substance. Ones that didn't rely on flashy visuals and loud noises to distract you from a paper-thin dog-shit excuse for a plot. But most of all, I felt sad for that guy. The guy who got an opening night ticket, broke out his cosplay gear to cheer on his childhood hero, only to be met with the realization that he was witnessing the slow yet inevitable death rattle of his childhood right before his eyes. If there was ever a character who exemplified the greatest cross-section of intelligence and badassery, it was Indiana Jones. I mean, a college professor who in his off time raids tombs and fistfights guys twice his size? What was there not to like? Indy was the walking embodiment of the statement, women want him and men want to be him. And for nearly a decade was the personification of cool. After 3 hyper-successful and well-received films, which for the most part completed his arc, it seemed as though Indy was done. Outside of a brief failed TV spin-off about Indy's early years, the franchise seemed to have been put on ice at the right time to preserve its place in history. That is until 2008. But we're not here to talk about that today. Maybe some other time, King Cool Refrigerator with your impractical lead lining. No, in fact today we are here to discuss an even larger atrocity. One that's happening now 15 years later. That, my friends, is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. A film no one asked for, featuring people no one likes. Produced by a company no one has any faith in, and written and directed by a guy who I'm fairly certain is being held against his will at this point. So let's get this out of the way before my last little bit of will to live dies along with one of my favorite franchises. The film picks up at the tail end of World War II. The Nazis are loading priceless artifacts onto a train, as they seem to tend to do. You'd think at this point they would have learned their lesson about messing with antiquities. But much like how modern screenwriters would like audiences to completely forget about the previous consumable product and move on to the next one, so too is how they treat their characters, it would seem. As with previous entries in this series, this inevitably calls the attention of Indy and a new old friend we've never heard of up to this point. I wonder if this guy will be important to the narrative in any way, or just another Alfred Molina. Enter Basil Shaw, played by Toby Jones. Or you might know him better as that guy who appears in one entry of seemingly every single film series ever created. Though I really wish that Disney would decide if this guy is pro or anti-Nazi already. We get a typical back and forth with Indy and the Third Reich, which involves a fake Lance of Longinus, which will never be brought up again. Don't worry, it didn't matter anyway and likely should have been left out of the narrative. But runtime. After this pointless moment, we see the real prized possession of this film. The Dial of Archimedes, which is supposedly a navigation tool that uses mathematics to predict fissures in the fabric of time, allowing a person to move freely into the past or something. But it was split in 2, so I guess we technically only have half of it here. Yeah, it's kinda convoluted, and don't worry, it's only gonna get worse. Anyway, this is when we're introduced to Jürgen Voller, a Nazi scientist obsessed with obtaining the dial. Played by the consistently misused Mads Mikkelsen. Seriously, dude, get a new agent. He ends up in a rush to obtain the piece of the dial from the 2 archaeologists. Well, since this is the beginning of the film, I'll spare you the details on how Indy is successful in fending off the Nazis, since we already know he doesn't die here. We flash forward to the year 1969, where he is now a decrepit husk of the hero we once knew. Bitter over his ongoing divorce and still grieving the loss of his son. Wait, they killed Mutt? They did it off-screen? God damn it again! Fucking movies always fucking have shit, god damn it. He lumbers to the job he hates to teach students who don't care, hoping to just fade away to the obscurity of self-loathing. That is of course until a magical diverse angel of androgyny descends from the heavens to save him. Enter Helena Shaw, the daughter of Basil, you know, the guy from before, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge in her forehead mole. Quickly establishing herself as more intelligent than everyone around her, she uses Indy to obtain, you guessed it, the half of Archimedes' dial which Indy stole from her father years ago. From this point forward, the story plays out in typical Disney jump cut fashion, going from scene to scene and progressing what they call a plot using increasingly bigger and louder nonsensical moments to pad the runtime. But as a friend of mine, Mr. Brown, often says, let's not get bogged down, so I'll just give you the key moments. Firstly, if you like chase sequences, this is the film for you, because there are several, and each one is increasingly less plausible than the last. These include Indy being chased by vehicles while on horseback in the New York City streets, Indy chasing vehicles on a rickshaw Kershaw in the streets of Tangier, and Helena chasing a plane with a motorcycle on a Sicilian tarmac. The top speeds of these things are not the same, movie. They simply serve as a means to get from point A to point B, most often to get the next MacGuffin. There are glimpses of what could have been, such as a scene where Indy and Helena raid Archimedes' tomb for the second half of the dial. However, these just serve as a reminder that you could be using your time more wisely and rewatch the older films, which did these things all way better. It doesn't help that often these moments are punctuated by the script going out of its way to remind you of the significantly better past.
I've been tortured with voodoo.
As for the end, I usually tend to avoid giving out exact details for a film's climax, but honestly this one was so stupid I might as well. So as it turns out, the dial doesn't actually take you to a point in time of your choosing. It is rigged to always return to a fixed point in history. Or the continents moved or something like that. It's not really explained very well. This effectively nullifies Jurgen's plan to return to the earliest days of World War II and assassinate Hitler, in hopes of altering the course of the war. So rather than going back a few decades, they went back several centuries to the Battle of Syracuse. No, not that Syracuse, the other Syracuse. Here they all interact with Archimedes himself. Indy, despite being a lifelong devotee to historical preservation, has a seemingly cavalier attitude towards staying in the past and destroying the timeline. But Phoebe Waller-Overpass has different plans and forcibly takes him back. At least Archimedes assures us that this was always meant to happen, so time travel is handled in the only way that it can actually make sense. After all this, Indy returns to his own time to live out what's left of his sad life, which is what would have happened if not for the only scene in the entire film worth watching, and unfortunately it comes in the closing minutes. It's honestly a real shame to see what's become of the iconic character Indiana Jones. It's much like what happened to Han Solo before him, and for whatever reason Harrison Ford doesn't seem to care. I guess as long as the check's clear, his legacy is meaningless. With Indy it may actually be sadder to watch, as at least with his final performance as Han Solo, he was hidden behind other actors doing most of the heavy lifting in the physical scenes. But here, watching such a seminal character reduced to a shambling shell of his former self being upstaged by his diverse replacement is heartbreaking. At 80 years old, it's safe to assume that Harrison Ford is officially blown past the "I'm too old for this shit" period of life, all the way to the "I don't give a shit, just pay me" phase. Honestly, the fact that he's still active in Hollywood is a bit surprising considering his apparent contempt for the characters that made him a household name. But with another role forthcoming in Captain America Brave New World where he's slotting in as a replacement actor for Thunderbolt Ross, he doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. Perhaps he'll surprise us, but odds are that he'll just complete the Disney trifecta of disappointment by phoning in another role. Which is a real shame because that one won't be tarnishing his own legacy but William Hurt's, who is one of the few actors who still seem to give a shit about the MCU. As for Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I really have no idea what Hollywood and specifically Lucasfilm see in this woman. I've been told by several people she used to be funny back in the day when she starred in Fleabag, but having never seen it, it's impossible for me to confirm or deny these claims. All I can really speak on is what I've seen of her since, and that seems to be that she's box office poison. With her performance here, that trend seems to be continuing. She's flat out insufferable, and they attempt to play her off as the hottest woman in the room constantly.
Flaming, resourceful, daring, beautiful, self-sufficient!
Which somehow still fails even though she's practically the only woman in the entire film. Also, for a person coming from a comedy background, her delivery misses the mark constantly, and I could not hear a single laugh come from the dozen or so people I was sitting with. And that's pretty sad considering the fact they used the throw shit at the wall method of jokes for her dialogue. All that being said, at least I can say she wasn't the virtue-signaling hyper-feminist that I was expecting. Instead, she found other ways to be overwhelmingly dreadful to watch. Mads Mikkelsen might be the one lone bright spot on this cast. And truly, at this point, I'm really starting to feel sorry for this guy. He's clearly an actor who takes his craft very seriously, but is constantly hamstrung by terrible scripts and hollow, empty plots. I really hope that he starts getting better roles in the near future. But seeing as how he's officially been in 3 Disney properties now, they have clearly sunk their teeth into the prime of his career and are slowly draining the life out of him. Lastly, for the supporting cast, there isn't much to say, and for the most part they have no personality, basically serving as waypoints between objectives. It was fun to see Sala come back, but it really just amounted to a spoon feeding of member berries. The only 2 supporting characters who get any type of development are Basil Shaw, who was quickly forgotten about as simply a point of reference to progress the plot, and Teddy, Helena's teenage wonder child of a partner who effectively serves as a convenient plot device with relevant knowledge and skills above what he should ever possess. The easiest way to explain the pacing of this film would be to say that it could be trimmed by 154 minutes, as it doesn't actually need to exist. But that's basically cheating, so rather than do that, let's look at the previous films and see where they stack up. When we average out the other 4 films, we come up with an average runtime of almost exactly 2 hours. When compared to the runtime of Dial of Destiny, we see how they achieved more with less. So I guess I get to use my new gimmick today. Take it away, generic voice clip Dark Hour. The pacing of this film is terrible, and it could have been cut down by 20 to 30 minutes. As with most Disney productions, one really must scratch their head at exactly where this budget goes. From the opening moments, you can see that the CGI just isn't good. The digital de-aging looks terrible, especially when Harrison Ford is in motion. The sets just look like rendered backgrounds, and there are even ADR moments where the untrained eye will be able to see that the words just don't match with the lip motion. emotions. These are unforgivable given the scope of money being pumped into this project. It isn't all bad. At least John Williams seems to have cared enough to actually craft a score that feels like an indie film, albeit at the expense of seemingly trying to really ram home exactly what you're watching. With an estimated budget of around $300 million, placing it in the top 10 of all time in production costs, Dial of Destiny is already facing an uphill battle toward profitability. This, coupled with early negative press and less than stellar reviews, have placed this film in a very tough situation for the studio. Odds are for this movie's bottom line to come out of the red, it will need to make somewhere between $750 and $800 million. Going based on the opening weekend and my personal experience of sitting in a 3/4 empty theater on opening night, it is very unlikely to happen. I know that it's been reported by various pundits and speculators, some of which may or may not wear a mask, that basically since The Last Jedi, Kathleen Kennedy has been on the hot seat, and one more high-profile flop is likely to sink her completely out of Lucasfilm. Well, seeing as how this is likely to join the trash heap of money pit films that is known as 2023, we will get a chance to see if that's true. Whether you're a diehard fan of Indiana Jones like that guy I was sitting next to, or just a casual consumer who just kind of grew up knowing he was a culturally significant character is irrelevant. Pretty much anyone with working eyes and ears can pick up on the complete lack of respect being shown to this iconic character. That in itself should be enough to steer people away from yet another Disney cash grab. But when you add the fact that the film itself is trash, simply designed to continue pushing a narcissistic agenda of a tone-deaf executive who has failed her way up the chain of command, one can only hope that this is the last time that we see a beloved franchise shit on for the sake of vanity. I didn't have a channel back when Disney purchased Lucasfilm and created that abortion of justice known as the sequel trilogy, so I'm finally getting the chance to speak my mind on the topic. It has become commonplace for this corporation, which once stood as a beacon of creativity and quality, to simply purchase existing IPs and bastardize them in spite of their fan bases. Try as we might, our complaints fall upon the deaf ears of isolated Hollywood sycophants masquerading as creatives, who simply do not care about what they destroy in order to get their message across. And much like you, I am sick of seeing things I loved as a child and even a young adult ruined to stroke the egos of self-important writers and executives. Indiana Jones deserves better, Star Wars deserves better, Lucasfilm deserves better, and we the fans deserve better. So don't treat this like a train wreck that you just have to look at. Don't hate watch this for the lulz. Let the present die and kill it if you have to. And the only way to do that is ensuring that this film is a massive flop. So in short, don't see Indiana Jones and the Diarrhea of Dysentery. Attack them in the pocket and then see if they care.
It's called capitalism.